Yeah. Woo. Hey, that was pretty smooth. Friday Night Feels is getting pretty smooth. Yay. All right, everyone. Welcome to Friday Night Feels. I am licensed mental health counselor and certified life coach, Patrick Monette, and this is Friday Night Feels, which is a show that focuses on a variety of wellness-related issues such as mental health, health concerns, stress management, relationships, mindfulness, and so much more. The focus of the show is to create connection and to be able to talk about issues that affect us all and how to be the healthiest versions of ourselves that we can be. Each show, I invite one or numerous co-hosts to join me and talk about their experiences. My incredible guest tonight is Jana. Did I say that right?
Jana, yeah.
Jana, I knew the anxiety. Jana Glass from Georgia, Atlanta. So welcome, Jana.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with you tonight.
Yay. And it was funny. And I just like to present some of the information of your bio so people know, where people are coming from. So she is a licensed professional counselor, certified in brain spotting, addiction, perinatal mental health, and telemental health. Although she works with a wide spectrum of clients, her special interests include healing trauma, substance abuse, and perinatal mental health. She puts the priority of this population, including fertility struggles, miscarriage, difficult births, pre and postpartum depression, anxiety, and obsessive compulsive disorder. So welcome to Friday Night Feels.
Yeah, it's great to be here. It's been quite a few couple of weeks for us to be talking about these topics.
I know. And, it's funny, sometimes we get talking before the show and we sort of lose track and it's like, oh, wait a minute, we have to go live now. So it's always because we were just talking about, the different areas that we have in common. But I would really like to kind of jump in with what we were talking about, the perinatal mental health. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that's interesting is when I was in grad school, which seems like a lifetime ago, we didn't talk about this at all. And could you maybe share a little bit of where it comes from and the evolution of perinatal and what it actually is?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, it's really focusing on the time period. I started a little earlier than most, but when people start really considering expanding and making their own families, okay. However they're going to choose to do that. We bring so much of our history and any past difficult events into the role of being a parent. And so we may not realize that things that were hard in our past that maybe we haven't fully resolved on a brain level, they're going to show up in our parenting. And they get amplified. It's like having a huge magnifying glass and a spotlight put on those things. Right. So helping people address previous things that may or may not have anything to do with becoming a parent. And then all the various struggles that can happen on the journey to parenthood, whether we're talking about fertility issues, conception issues, maintaining a pregnancy, actually giving birth, and then anything postpartum. Traditionally, the perinatal period it was normally considered from when a person gave birth till a year after. Okay. And it's been expanded a bit further, closer to more like 2.5 years of the perinatal period. For me and my experience, when people have a traumatic experience while they're expanding their family, I will talk to people whose children are grown and out of the house. Mm-hmm. And if they still have trauma that they've never fully addressed, it's still there. Right. It's still present. And to me, part of what makes trauma is, although it happened in the past, it affects you in the present in a way that's unpleasant or negative or difficult. And so even though you're like, but that happened 2 decades ago.
Right. It is what it is. Right? Move on, right? We hear
if you don't get what you need.
Yeah, that's such a beautiful description of trauma. Yes. Yeah. I love that.
And so, people, anything system overwhelming, too much, too fast, there's a lot of different definitions. But I think for me in my work, it's recognizing that trauma really is in the eye of the beholder. Mm-hmm. And that something that may be very traumatic for me may not impact you at all.
Right.
Sometimes when people have traumatic events, they can be fairly universal. Or of like a wide held experience, like being rejected, not being accepted into a program you wanted to be in, a breakup, things of that nature that most people will have some experience with in their lives. But for some people, it becomes overwhelming and it's really hard for them. It becomes traumatic. It's not always your car accidents or active combat or physical attack. It can be a range of things.
Right. And it can also, it's also, oh, the word just jumped out of my head. It's not having something happen.
Completely.
The abandonment or neglect, or just in what I love, I think that's the Greek definition of trauma is wound.
Yeah.
And it's just, so when I'm talking to somebody, as an EMDR therapist, whether it's couples, individuals, or groups, to normalize trauma as, oh, if we change the word trauma for wound, how many of us have different variations of trauma, right?
Exactly. Well, I don't think most of us get through life without having any experience that we would consider traumatic, and so I think that is what's difficult during the perinatal period, is that so many of these things that would be traumatic are because they are private. Right. And because we are even more isolated due to COVID and all the other challenges, right. People might not even know that someone experienced a loss or a series of losses, right. Or that they're needing to get assistance with reproduction. Right. And so it's a very invisible experience for folks. And most people don't think that that's going to be part of their story.
Right, right.
And so when that happens, it's a lot to hold. But then if people go on later to complete their families, then people are like, oh, but you got your kids.
Yes, right? Yeah.
So, well, they miss, but and that is true.
Right.
Space
it
for
totally
hope.
Bypasses the pain.
Correct. And so, especially earlier losses and miscarriage, people will be like, well, but you went on to have a baby, but it's not a replacement. It's not, oh, this baby then takes away all the pain from the lost one. It's both.
And some of the things too that I hear are, if a woman has a miscarriage, there's a time limit of how upsetting it should be. Like, oh, you were only this long. Oh, you only, as if it's not painful and horrific.
Sure.
And then it's like, you can just try again, as if it's like, it's, and it's like when you hear it and then you see people who have to who are in the pain and who are in those waves of excruciating pain, to have to respond to that, it is really upsetting.
Well, and having to keep moving forward once you know what's possible that you don't want, because it's happened. Right. And so I'm not denying that there's some people who have a really easy time conceiving and have great pregnancies and ideal births. I just don't meet them.
Right.
I meet the folks who have had a lot of difficulty, and it's, for them, all of that remains. And so often people feel like they're on a timeline when it comes to fertility. Right. So there's not a lot of time to stop and grieve every difficult event and feel like you're, in a great healing space, then move forward with the rest of your journey. It's like, I got to keep going. I got to keep going. So then what often happens is that you have all these difficulties, but you push forward. So then you reach your outcome that you were looking for. And then all the losses hit you like a ton of bricks because you haven't made space for it. And then you take a breath and then it comes and then you're like, wait, why is this so hard? I got what I wanted. And now I feel terrible. And so that's why I love jumping in where I do. I am trained in EMDR. I also use brain spotting a lot. These are powerful brain and body based approaches, and they really can help people, especially who've had a long struggle. The least that someone should be able to do is enjoy their role as a parent. Right. And to not have to, yes, you have to experience all your losses and aftermath, but it doesn't have to stay with you for decades. Trauma is treatable. We are able to help people have a more integrated experience it'll never be positive. You can't go backwards and be like, I am so glad all that happened.
Right. And I think that, and I hear that a lot as well, is when we're dealing with trauma, when you're trying to treat trauma, it doesn't make the traumatic thing not happen. It just makes it, as you say, less painful and more, so you can actually feel relief and peace and move on a little bit easier.
And so you can feel more grounded in it. You're not as emotionally activated, and it becomes more of like the fabric of your story.
Right.
And then that's when we're able to move towards post-traumatic growth, where people are able to make meaning of their story. I'm sure people have probably heard of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who had kind of the stages of death and dying. Her protege, David Kessler, added another step on after she passed away, and that was making meaning of your loss.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yes, I've heard that.
So part of the journey that I guide some of my clients through is really being able to feel like the story is integrated, not feel like it's still impacting you negatively today, and then how they each want to make meaning of the experiences they've had. And that can happen in so many different ways. But I think it's the last step in the healing.
Right.
You know, you may not have, nobody ever really has full understanding of why things happen. But if it can help them feel more connected and have more of a purpose, then that just helps that healing cycle, you know, as people continue forward and face the next set of series they're going to face.
Right, right. So in your experience, you know, I just have so many questions because I think this is so fascinating. And I honestly, and you can tell me, I don't think this is talked about enough at all. As I said, in grad school, this was never discussed, that it existed, or that it's a specialty. And I don't know, I don't know where they dropped the ball, right?
Right.
Can you give some examples of what perinatal traumas are that you see specifically that people may have experienced and not necessarily know that it was perinatal specifically?
Yeah. I mean, so I think some people, because we're not great as a society of talking about death and loss at all, including the loss of what we thought our lives were going to be like. Right. Like we all have a reproductive story, regardless if we have children ever.
Right.
So some people's reproductive story is don't want kids, not interested, never gonna have them, stop asking, right?
Right.
And then other people go really detailed into, I'm gonna have this many kids and I hope they're these, sex, and I want to have them at this age, etc. But so that becomes part of our identity. And so when things don't happen the way we hoped and dreamed they would, when our reality doesn't match, that is a huge loss.
Yes.
And that is perinatal trauma that you wouldn't necessarily recognize as easily as you might a specific event.
Well, and even, and the reason I ask that too is to validate people's loss. And to know, and I think having a term for it is so powerful, because then the one thing that I was thinking when you were sharing a few minutes ago was how so many people suffer in silence.
Completely. And it's amazing because the statistics show that 1 in 4 pregnancies will end in miscarriage.
Wow.
And so some people are aware when that happens and some people are not, because sometimes the losses are so early in the process that it just shows up as a heavier or more painful menstrual cycle. Other people who are very much aware and tracking cycles and really checking, they will know from the very beginning.
Right.
And so, whether you achieved a conception situation for a day or a week or a month or a trimester, we really do start to invest in the story that we're going to have of what's going to happen. And so when that doesn't happen, the term that's used, I don't love it, but is disenfranchised grief. And it's the idea, I don't love the word.
Right. Yeah, I can.
But it's really, it's a loss of something you never actually had.
Yes. Wow.
And so that's what's hard for people is like, I have clients ask me, but can I miss someone I never met? And the
Wow,
answer is
like they need that permission.
absolutely you can, because this was your hope and your dream, and anything you might have done to get to that point was real.
Right.
And then when that was verified for you that this was going to happen, that was huge. And then when you got news it wasn't going to happen, that was huge.
Yes. Yes.
And so,
And also probably thinking, I'll always have that choice. And then all of a sudden that choice is gone for whatever reason.
right, exactly. And there's another term I really like, who Cole Imperi just had created this fairly recently. I like her work. It's called shadow loss.
Mm.
So it's all the losses associated, not necessarily with a death.
Wow, that's beautiful.
So it is all the things you envisioned happening: birthdays, friend groups, when you're like, oh, I'm pregnant. Oh, so are these people. Oh my gosh, our kids are going to grow up together.
Right. Yes. Yes.
And then that story turns differently for you. Each time you may see their children, you might think, oh, had my baby made it here, they would be doing this too.
Right.
Kindergarten graduation, they would have, etc., right? Because we associate things. And so maybe only that you've associated that, but each of those things not getting to happen is a loss of maybe a friendship group, because a cohort might have been going through a similar life phase, possibly having to have your first child when your friends are having their second child. It's not always cohort, but I'm saying, that there's all these other shadow losses that come, but they're real for that person. And if you've made that association, there is loss.
Yes. And when you and what about, sorry, my mind just jumped a little bit. It's Friday night feels, sorry, it's filter free. We'll go into it, because my mind is just like, I have so many questions of, because this is just so powerful of what you're saying. And I also just want to acknowledge being a man and a male therapist and learning about this, I think is very important, because I think when we look at gender stereotypes, we think, oh, this only affects women, or women are the only ones to deal with this and talk about it. And being able to learn about something that can never happen to me in my body,
right,
is checking that privilege of, okay, so I want to know these stories. I want to understand this, not only just as a clinician, but as a person. So I just really appreciate everything that you're sharing, because as I said, some of these things, like I grew up in a large family, so we never talked about this. It was just more of some of the phrases I would hear is like, oh, it's God's will if something happened, or it wasn't meant to be, or it was. And then it was just sort of like, we don't talk about things like this anymore. And just as you're saying, whether that's not being able to have babies, or the family that you want, maybe some judgment if there was adoption and not, I don't know if you see that at all, like,
completely.
and then if you do have the baby, if it's a traumatic birth, and once again, well, it's sort of like that spiritual bypassing. It's like, oh, it's okay, you should be happy. Well, when there's postpartum depression and all of these things, or the relationship changes.
Yeah. And I do want to highlight that what partners, the non-caring partner, whether that's male or whoever it ends up being in a pair, we see that a third of those folks will also have postpartum depression. I know that sounds weird to hear.
No, it makes perfect sense though.
It's not the same drivers, because there's not the same hormonal piece to it, but systems are impacted by each other. And so if you think about it, the non-carrying partner, if something difficult happens throughout the pregnancy or in the birth room, in some ways, it could be even more traumatic for that person, because when we look at what really are the underpinnings of trauma, it's being out of control. It's not being able to be helpful or have a say in a situation. It may be not feeling respected in it. It just depends, right? But so if you think about during a birth, when is the partner less able to directly impact what's happening around them. And so to see your partner go through something, I know the partner's experiencing it firsthand, I'm not minimizing that, but to be a witness to that and literally have no way to help is also extremely traumatic.
Yes.
And so that's something to keep in mind. And when it comes to losses, the non-carrying partner can also very much experience loss.
Right.
It may not be the same, but there's still the loss of the presence of what they planned to happen. It may be, less concrete because it wasn't within their own body. But that doesn't mean that we should not assume that the non-carrying partner is like, oh, well, that sucks. Let's just
move on. What do you want for dinner? What do you want for dinner? Yeah.
Well, that's just not my experience with who I work with, that they have a lot of feelings.
Yes.
They're not sure that it's valid or justified because they weren't carrying.
So that comparison of like, my pain can't be anywhere like yours, and instead of you're in pain and I'm in pain, that's okay.
So like, how do we help each other through our pain? And how do we grow together as a couple through this hard thing, instead of doing our own thing and potentially also having a hard time staying together, because that does happen when there's difficulties.
And I also see it too in the non-caring parent too, the fear of losing the, the partner as well, if there is a medical emergency or something. So not only just losing the child or children, but also the fear of, if we try this again, you're at a higher risk of losing you both.
Yeah. And like, just being honest, it's not that safe to give birth in the United States. Our mortality rates are incredibly high. I live in the state of Georgia, and they're actually the highest in the entire United States.
Oh.
And there's a lot of factors that go into that, but when we have access to solid healthcare, when we listen to our birth givers and what it is that they're sharing with us, when we partner with them in the process and not dismiss any symptoms that we're seeing.
And I hear that a lot with people with dealing with perinatal traumas. I didn't feel heard.
Right.
And not to, like, the experiences, like if I was with a medical professional or someone of saying, oh, just wipe it, it was like you're saying, it was invalidated. Correct. It's like something feels wrong.
Yeah. And I will say, this is not scientific, but in my experience, the folks I work with who have late term losses, and I have folks who, unfortunately, the baby dies in like the very last week of pregnancy, they always knew something wasn't right. And more often than not, they called their provider and said, something's not right. And they were told everything's fine. We'll see you in 3 days.
Oh my gosh.
And when they came in 3 days, they got the news that their baby was no longer alive. And so I try to work locally with practices that have a different paradigm, who say, oh, you have a bad feeling? Come on in. Worst case, we'll see everything's fine. Big deal. Right? Like,
better safe than sorry.
No foul.
Right.
We'll never know if anything could have been done, but that's kind of the point, is living with the wondering, had I called,
and that's another piece too. And I'm sure you see it as the mom guilt. And I'm just using that term. It's not all inclusive. I like the caring, but could I have done something, even when, and I see that even when everything goes well, mom guilt. I mean, maybe we could have a whole other conversation on that, of this incredible, I see these parents who are killing themselves to be good parents. And they're not even being able to enjoy being parents because they just have that guilt of like, I'm not enough.
Right. And so it's amazing to me that in this case, whether we use mother or birth giver, we'll take full blame for anything that goes wrong, yet will not take credit for what goes right.
Right.
And there's a million things that go right every single day, and a million ways to be a good parent. But I never see the person in front of me saying, I feel really good about these 5 things. Like, this was awesome. It's more like, oh my God, and this isn't happening, and this, and I need to check on this, etc. And so I'm not saying you ignore those needs, but being able to celebrate like some of the success may have had something to do with you as well.
Right. A little more balance. We're just
Yeah,
looking at balance, like
exactly.
the million decisions they make every day, it's so powerful. And I think that being able to have these types of conversations too illuminates more and brings up of, not being able to have a child.
Yeah.
Not being able to, as you're saying, the family that you want. And so what are some of the specific issues that you've seen that are challenges with people who want to have a family?
Yeah, I mean, so, obvious thing would be conception issues,
Okay.
And being able to maintain a pregnancy and trying to determine if those things aren't happening, if there is a why. And sometimes there's things to identify. A good percentage of the time it's a male factor issue.
Okay.
The other times, it may be something physical going on with, the person who'll be carrying. It may be a specific diagnosis, but then it's really hard because there's also unexplained fertility issues.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when no one has any idea why it's not happening, but it's still not happening.
Okay.
But there's not a problem to solve. So I think that's really hard for folks because when you have a problem, it's not great, but at least you can put your energy to solving it.
Right.
There's some more nuanced challenges that my clients face, living in Atlanta in particular. There's all different kinds of makeups of people who want to have children. Some of them are single parents by choice.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are transgender, meaning that the sex that they were assigned at birth, they now feel as though that was not the correct sex.
Mm-hmm.
And so in various ways, they're seeking to be the accurate sex that they feel like they should have always been. And people are in different phases of that process. I have clients who practice polyamory, which meaning they have more than one partner. And, sometimes the partner has sperm and sometimes they don't.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's all these different layers and challenges around having the right gametes in the mix for people to be able to build the family they want.
Right. And also kind of what you were saying too, a lot of the medical components in care is privilege. Is socioeconomic, cultural, all of those pieces that I think are so important to talk about, of access to healthcare.
Yeah.
I live in a small area where I just think of, we have a bus, like that goes like maybe once or twice a day. And I'm thankful that we have that, but we have people who live 20, 40, 50 minutes outside of where the hospital is, right? Or their doctor's office, so they can't go in, or they have to work all of those shifts in order to live, and they can't even get to the doctors or afford perinatal vitamins or any of that.
Right. And so there's systemic barriers for sure, especially if there's a challenge. There is a challenge for people of color to be able to access and find providers who reflect them when they see them, that they feel are similar or feel like they're comfortable with. That's a barrier. It's gotten better in certain areas, but even, anything outside of the CIS heteronormative relationship, I've had lesbian couples go in and each time they're like, oh, is the daddy excited?
Oh,
and they're like, there's no daddy.
Yeah.
You can read the chart,
Right.
Just come in all in all different formats. And, so those are some of the challenges as well, as being, felt and heard and understood as the couple or single person that you are.
Right.
Another thing, not to go too off tangent, but, there's also a lot of fat phobia within the medical community.
Oh, okay. Can you talk a little bit more about that? That's interesting.
Yeah. So how that shows up is a lot of the fertility clinics in particular will set a specific BMI that if you are above that BMI, they will not provide you any services.
Oh, wow.
And so the rationale is something along the lines of some of the procedures may need anesthesia. However, a lot of my clients have already had other surgeries that were more intense and longer and were under anesthesia and did not have a negative impact. And a lot of these folks, when they have their blood panels done, are completely healthy, because you can be healthy at every size.
Right.
And so I think when we have just one criteria alone, I'm not a medical professional who makes these decisions,
Right.
but when we base it off of only one factor instead of multidimensional things to look at. So if someone's blood pressure is great and cholesterol's in check and all their levels look amazing, but they're in a larger body than you would wanted them to be, on some level that can be discriminatory if that's the only basis.
So then what, do they get a recommendation of, oh, you have to, I mean, how do they express that?
For this person, what happened was that they were like, okay, well, in this scenario, all I really need is sperm. So I'm going to order sperm from a donor clinic, like totally legit.
Okay.
And the fertility clinic's like, good luck. So when they contacted the sperm bank that was in another state, they said, sure, we're happy to mail it to your home. However, we need the clinic to sign off on that.
Okay.
So then they contacted the clinic back and said, we need this form. And they said, oh, it's illegal to do home insemination in Georgia. We won't sign it. So the person's like, oh, you just mentioned that now?
Right.
And I just highlight that's Georgia, right?
Yes.
So the next step for this individual was to find a nearby state that it is legal to do so, and is going to travel to that state and have the sperm shipped to that state for them to try at home insemination.
All of those hoops to.
It's so many hoops to get through to get
Right.
from A to B to C. And I think the frustration this individual is having is they're highly stable. They're incredibly ready for a child. They have a partner with them who wants one. They are economically stable. They are emotionally stable. They're, and they're like, we're hitting all these barriers left and right. And each piece along the way, there's another challenge that other people just wouldn't see.
Right. Right.
And so, but it's so hard, this person was talking about once they finish their journey that they might write a little handbook for other people who are in
definitely, right.
But that because of legalities and other challenges that may not be well known, they won't publicize while they're in process. Right. Like, and they're trying to be very legal about it, but they're like, I don't get it. Like, I could also go out and have a one night stand and get pregnant.
Right.
But
that takes away the choice. That takes away the choice.
Correct.
In my opinion, and just and the safety.
Yes, but just the irony. I don't think.
Yes,
that
of course.
On the
no. I could see where that. Yeah.
That they're like, I keep going this way and I get blocked, and I go this way.
Yeah, you're like, just screw it. I'll do that. Yeah, I get it. I feel for that.
Right. But like, but ironically, that other people, who go through more traditional means, I guess, or original means, I don't know what you think of it, that they don't have to get any kinds of permissions or anything.
Right.
And so, I just think being aware of some of these challenges is real, and that our healthcare system is incredibly biased in lots of ways.
Yes.
And that, that is not always fair.
Right.
The criteria used is not always fair or equitable.
Right. And so how do you guide people when they're dealing with these issues?
So part of there's the rational logical part and like the plan making, right, that they're doing. But then it's also being able to create space for all the emotional toll this takes, all the extra mental work that this takes, and how alone and invisible that person feels, because there might be other people on that same journey, but they don't know who they are. So they're connecting. So it's not even just a fertility journey, because their fertility journeys, because they don't have access to sperm. And so it seems so solvable, right? So it's like the logical parts. And then it's also being able to hold space for all the efforts made, all the frustrations and anger and injustice that they feel, being able, like through brain spotting, to be able to release that and not have to carry it, because that's what helps them on the journey, is having like an emotional release valve, because there's more to come. There's more challenges to come.
And I would imagine for some people, when they can't, even if it's not a sperm problem, if they just can't, that desperation
Yeah.
And then I would, knowing myself, would be bitter of like, well, you did just have a one night stand, or you have 6 kids, and or like you're like popcorn and you can have kids, or like it would be hard to, and maybe that's where, and we can talk a little bit about brain spotting if
Yes.
you'd like, of to help that pain out. But it's also kind of, I think my approach is, you're allowed to be pissed off. It's okay.
Yeah,
It's better
completely.
out than in.
Fully agree with that. And I think that's the other part people are not necessarily compassionate about, because I know people who on reproductive journeys get asked to host friends' baby showers, and that they are put in a position to have to set a limit around their own emotional capacity. But they're kind of annoyed that they had to even do that. That like, I'm having trouble having a kid. Like, do you really think I want the baby shower at my house? Like,
Right.
I mean, it's just, but the individual was like, but it's convenient. Could we do it there? And so being
It's a
able to
hard pass.
set all those different limits and boundaries, and
Yes.
how do you be happy for others, even if you're not experiencing, like, even if they're getting what you don't have
Yes.
quite yet.
Yes.
Because I think, yes, it's normal to have feelings about, oh, how did that happen so easy for them? Or, people who are like, oh, we got pregnant the first time we tried. You want to be able to have space to be happy for them and sad for you.
Yes. Yes. And knowing you can have those contrasting emotions, I think, is an important conversation. You can be angry and sad and hopeful and also thankful. Like, for example, I see that too in families. Like sisters or brothers, it's like, oh, they can have kids, but I can't. It's like, you love the nieces and nephews or whatnot. But again, it's that excruciating cycle of pain of reminders. I think is when I work with someone with perinatal work, I think what I see most is how to help them ride those waves of those reminders of, the one thing and I don't know when this has become so popular, is the gender reveal. So it's not just like the pregnancy, it's like, and
Yes.
I'm all for cake and parties, so I'll do whatever, but like, it's such a different thing. Like, it didn't exist when I was growing up. So I feel old saying that, but hey, but all of
true
all
is
in
that
all of these expectations and all of these pieces of it, which makes it more pressure, I find.
It does, because it's not just, oh, wow, we're going to have a baby. It's, I've got to do this spectacular reveal to you that we're pregnant.
Yes.
Which generally gets taken away if you need assisted reproduction.
Yes.
And then you need to have awesome ways to tell your close family and friends, and then a gender reveal. But what I find is really painful for folks about the gender reveals is a lot of the time that would coincide around the time of an anatomy scan. And that is when you would get information that maybe things aren't going as well as you had hoped.
Oh, okay. Wow.
And so it's an interesting, I mean, it doesn't have to be, right? Some people can learn the gender earlier, but I think that often happens is that people who aren't getting specific genetic testing earlier, they usually get final confirmation right around then. And so that's also, so you might plan a gender reveal, which I've had clients who have, and then unfortunately at the anatomy scan, they get really awful news about the status of their baby's health. Sometimes that's repairable and sometimes it's not. And so it sets off a whole new series of concerns and, direction that people hope to never have to even think about going.
Right. The worst nightmare.
And so, but you're right. Like, I mean, my kids are 8-year-old twins, and they they came to me and they're like, tell us about our gender reveal. And I was like, you didn't have one. And they were like, why not?
What kind of mom are you?
And they were like,
isn't that funny? Wow.
Right? Like, they were offended that we didn't do that. And I was like,
do it now, I guess.
I was like, because that wasn't really a big thing. Because now if they're watching anything on the internet, there's a million that pop up and they're all special and unique and blah, 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 So I'm not taking away people's joy or happiness from that. I'm just saying there is another
piece to it. Yeah, absolutely. And also, the one thing too is not only that personal grief, but then you have to answer all the questions.
Right.
And and then with social media, do you post, do you not, and then this and then it goes right back to what you were saying at the beginning. People don't, at least in the States, don't know how to deal with guilt.
No.
So do we support them? Do we talk about that? And what I see, which is excruciating, kind of like what we were talking about, giving them permission to be angry, is you can be sad for the rest of your life.
Completely. And whereas people generally think, ooh, don't talk about it because it'll upset them.
Yes.
In my work, I see it's actually the opposite.
Yes.
That people, I mean, again, it's not one group is everything, right?
Right.
Like, but a lot of people love to hear their baby's name said out loud.
Right. Right.
If they named them, right? Like, love to know that like the baby mattered to you too.
Yes.
And that you care,
and they were real.
They were real, and that you're inquiring not just a week after or a month after,
right.
but ongoing, and that, at different events or different life cycle type things, that they're recognized and validated.
And also, and I know, and I don't know about in Georgia, I'm sure you work with them, but I know in our area, there's an amazing non-for-profit organization called Grace's Hope, which focuses with helping family. And, I had the founder on Friday Night Feels a couple months ago, and the beautiful things that they can do, like recording heartbeats and putting in a teddy bear, all of these things of honoring that this is part of your life, that this is part of your family. And it really shattered some of my preconceived ideas of grief. And oh my gosh, we can bring this in at any time and love.
Right. And with that individual's permission. And so, I mean, the people who are like, no, please don't, no, we didn't name, like, of course you wouldn't do that then. Right. But that's what I see, big grins on my clients' faces when I say their children's name, whether they're earthside or not.
Right.
And they're like, oh yeah, yeah, like it's good, because they are really real for them.
Right.
But I'm trying to remember your original question.
Oh, sorry. Well, I was jumping around. So it's like, episode 1, right, of the saga that we're going to do. Well, I wanted to go into a little bit of, you had mentioned something called, and you and I talked about this before, brain spotting. Yes. Could you share with us a little bit about what that is and how that pertains to the work that you do?
Yeah, completely. So it's a very powerful brain and body based approach that really harnesses the brain's natural ability to heal. And so as we go through life, we experience all different kinds of events. And some of those are, system overwhelming and traumatic. And, sometimes people have traumatic events, but really it processes through on a brain level and like they're really okay. Right. Like even stuff that we'd be like, what? Like they'd be like, no, like I'm really fine. But so the things that don't get fully integrated, metaphorically, I think of them as almost little thorns that stick out that catch on everything. Metaphorically. And so, if you have something that's not settled, anything in your present day, it's going to catch on. And so what that looks like is reacting stronger than what a situation might call for. Continuously being more irritable, not feeling like yourself, even potentially having more signs of anxiety or depression, just lacking motivation, etc. Trying traditional talk therapies where you are trying to talk out your problem, but you're not getting the results you're looking for. Then we enter brain spotting that really helps those thorns get smoothed over so that it's more integrated. So the story does not change. It's how you feel about it that changes. And it's done by locating a fixed eye position that connects to the topic you're focused on.
Wow.
And so it's really based on the relationship with the therapist. We always, as therapists, want to attune to the content. Like we want people to feel heard. We want to listen. We want to be present. But what brain spotting adds is also attuning to the person's nervous system and their neurobiology. So we're tracking how activated or calm a person is, because when you start paying attention, you see that the nervous system gives us cues of what someone's experiencing. And so as we're engaging someone in that process, I'm being really quiet because we're bypassing the thinking brain and getting into the rational brain that wants to think it all through and getting into the emotional brain to then be able to once and for all settle through and process through on a brain level those feelings that are getting caught on everything, so that the story feels more integrated, that the experience doesn't hurt as much. And it makes the situation, never makes it better, but it makes it easier to live with. And it becomes more the fabric of our lives and an event that happened. And what's amazing about brain spotting is that if an event happened 2 years ago, but it was traumatic, it feels like it's right here. And it feels like it follows you.
Yes.
When you do the brain spotting, it takes its rightful place in the timeline. And people will say, that feels like it was 2 years ago or longer. And then when it takes its rightful place, you continue moving forward in time.
So your healing can actually
more
happen.
Space, right?
Right.
It doesn't feel like that was yesterday, because you'll hear people say like, oh, I remember that like yesterday.
Right.
Then it's like, no, I remember it, but like it feels distant. It doesn't feel close to me. And that's such a beautiful experience to reach, instead of it feeling so activating. And then those stronger emotions than what the situation calls for goes away. We start to shift and feel more like ourselves. And, it can be used with a whole variety of challenges. I use it with anxiety and depression. I work with people who are trying to stay sober. It's very effective with that, but what I love about it for the perinatal population is what is more body encompassing than trying to have a child.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And so
that's beautiful. Yeah.
Right into all of that. And even if you end up adopting, etc., there's still the absence of your body being involved in that process that brain spotting is so helpful with. And I just feel like with my clients, it helps them get to their true, authentic answers, even if they're hard. People have to face a lot of decisions. Do we keep trying this way? Do we try a different way? Do we give up? Should I not be a parent? Like a lot of questions that they're facing, that with the brain spotting process, they just get to their truth. And even if it's hard, it feels true. So it's easy to move forward in because it's congruent.
And it clears that fog.
Yes. And for some people, it's the indecision that's even harder.
Yes.
Like living with, well, what are we going to do? I got to make a decision. We're under a timeline. We've got to do this, and so, but it just brings about an internal peace around things that are so highly charged.
Right. And life-changing.
Yeah. And it's such a gift. And so no one is ever going to forget a child that they had, regardless of what stage of life it was in.
Right.
No one's going to forget that. But being able to have some reflection around gratitude of what you did get to experience, the impact that was made, the meaning you do want to make is just so important, because brain spotting also focuses on that post-traumatic growth, that like once you get past the trauma, are there parts that you want to amplify, that you want to expand, that you want to grow bigger for you, because now you have more space, because you're not as depressed, or you're not as anxious, or you're not as actively grieving. There's now more space and energy to do things.
To be more adaptable.
How do you want to use that now?
Right.
And it feels like being set free. And
now, I was just wondering, are you able to do brain spotting? I'm just thinking with Corona, the Rona, that never will go away. If you're able to do that on telehealth, I know with EMDR we've been able to. Okay.
Yeah, we've definitely been able to. And so it's funny, a portion of my clients, I was already seeing telehealth not because of the virus, but because the state of people who have newborns, they're like, I have to bring them.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And the this and the whatever, and all of that, which my office is completely open and welcome for all of the things, but it just felt so
one less trip.
Folks. Yes. So people are like, or I could sit on my computer while I'm breastfeeding and talk to you, like, yeah, sign me up. right? No
Yes,
driving.
that's one of the most beautiful things that I've seen, where parents like there's the safety, like they don't have to, especially when everything was much more locked down, they didn't have to get a babysitter. They could still get therapy support, adults interaction and validation, and their kids were safe in the other room, or the partner was watching or something
Exactly,
like that.
whether they're there. And
in the North Country we get a lot of snow. I'm sure down in Georgia may
not
not be an
here, but
issue.
yes.
But I mean, we get like where it's really cold, where just knowing your car's not going to start, or it's not safe to be on the road, you can still get therapy, and you can get these approaches that are going to really help treat the trauma.
Yes, and doing it online is so effective. And in some cases, for folks who feel really inhibited or feel like it's a lot to be that present with someone in person, the screen gives like a protective layer where people are willing to be more vulnerable, because you're not really you are with me, but you're not in the same room as me. That doesn't feel as like vulnerable to me. And so I've had clients be able to go further. And there's times where uniquely, like I'll have a client be like, I need to scream. I'm like, do it.
Yep.
And they're like, I want to mute. I'm like, mute.
Yeah.
But
do
just
it.
and then they will scream. Like it's organic and comes from them. I'm not like, you must scream now, but if that's what comes up, like how
They
great
can.
to do that without being like, oh my God, is your office mate going to fly in here?
Yes. Your safety.
I've had that happen. I've had people say, you know what, I just need to shut my camera off for a minute.
Yeah.
And I'm like, then do that.
Oh, and I've had people where we talk about it, and just knowing, like, I miss seeing people, and I do, like in our field, I do, but I love that someone doesn't have to drive, go through an elevator, especially when we're doing heavy work, go through an elevator, go in a waiting room, be seen by lots of people. They can just shut the screen off and be free.
Right.
Is beautiful. Like they have their dogs or their cats, they're they can go hunting, whatever it is that their coping skills are, they can have access to that.
Well, and how great to help people learn how to get calm and grounded in their own space they live in.
Yeah.
Right. Like
it's amazing.
That's huge. Gas prices being what they are. I mean, there's so many pros that come with it. And so I think blessing is now we more acutely know what's possible.
Right. And hopefully giving more accessibility.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
I know it's probably traumatic for parents who've had to homeschool during the last 2 years, so I don't want to open that wound for anyone.
No, but it's like I said, we've learned what's possible. And Atlanta's a bit of an island in the sense that the rest of the state has the same population as Atlanta.
Wow.
But it's a huge land mass. But there's the same number of people. And so, in more remote areas, some people to get prenatal care have to go 3 counties away for any kind of care because there's not providers.
Right. And so, then you have to take time off from work and have transportation and have that, or if you have anyone else, if you have other kids, like who's going to watch all of it? And those are the discussions I think
so many pieces.
Yes. And I'm sure we're just hitting the tip of the iceberg of what people face, but when you come back, we'll just have to continue the conversation. See, I just slid that in again.
I'd love to come back.
That would be awesome.
It's so nuanced. There's so many different aspects to this.
Yes.
But I think my goal is just to increase people's awareness that you never really know what someone's journey is like.
Right. And I don't know if you'll have an answer for this or in your experience, but going back to something that I said a little while ago of being a man and not really hearing about this, how do you see that in our field are you seeing a lot of male clinicians getting involved in perinatal, or is it?
There are some that are really taking up the cause of, male counterparts, fathers, non-birthing parents, and trying to increase awareness. Recognizing that everything in a system impacts each other. And so even if it is the birth giver who's having a hard time, their partner's not like, wow, this is great.
Right.
I'm so glad that I don't recognize my wife anymore. Right. She's emotionally not who I married. Right. that there's all these, so there, it is becoming more aware. You know, it's definitely more female driven, but our field is more female driven, let's be honest. But I see a lot more people willing to try to partner and to try to create more understanding. Well, because that's how we get into some of these challenges, is that people start making decisions about other people's reproductive process without any basis or knowledge.
Right. And taking away their voice and their rights.
Completely. And so I think that is a huge part of it. And that, you know, if you, whoever you are in whatever form, if you're thinking about having a child, you should probably know a little bit more in depth about what's happening.
Right. Or not wanting to have a child.
Or not wanting to, absolutely, or not wanting to have a child, but like what really goes into that, what someone experiences, you know, not feeling like, oh, well, wow, that sucks for you. It's like, it sucks for us because we're in this together and we're parenting, you know, but it's improved a little bit in the education systems and mental health. Like there's some that have, but it's still, it's kind of that tokenism class sometimes, you know, and again, I just don't think a lot of men are drawn to this field because they're like, I don't do that. My body doesn't do that. But there are more, and especially people who have been impacted. That's how they make meaning of their stories. A lot of the folks who are taking the lead have had partners that unfortunately, you know, may have completed suicide or may have died in childbirth, or, you know, a variety of things where they're making their meaning by sounding the drum and going, hi guys, like we need you involved. Like this matters too.
Yes. And it's interesting to say that because with Grace's Hope, one of the programs that we're starting is I'm helping to facilitate a group that we call I Don't Want to Talk About It, for men or identify. So and that what's nice about it is it's a group, so it can be across the country or international, that people can join once a month. And we're really hoping it just to have that safe place for guys to go and talk to her and say, it's like, hey, this really sucks, or this is what I'm struggling with, or I miss my partner, like this killed our relationship, and just getting some support so then they can be the partner that they want to be.
I love that, because, you know, if the challenge around fertility, then having sex goes from pleasure to a job.
Yes.
It goes from spontaneous to regimented.
Right.
And, you know, when it's so closely tied to a specific outcome, it loses a lot of its joy. It loses a lot of
the love,
the parts that people are just unabashedly enjoying each other. It turns into, I know you don't want to, I know I don't want to, but we gotta. Today's the day.
Yeah.
Right.
Going to the bathroom.
It's a lot. There has to be intentionality in rebuilding the physical connection afterwards and resetting that. Like once your family looks the way you want it to look and you feel like it's complete, in reconnecting differently and no longer associating it that way. But that takes both partners. That's not just as easy as, oh, hey, let me throw on some music and light a candle, you know? It takes more, the intimacy, I mean, not always, but when you build, especially if it's over many years.
Yes. And if you've had these losses. And
it gets associated there too. And so it, you know, but again, it's because people ask me, like, do I do couples work? And I do, not in traditional sense of like just general communication, but around perinatal things is where I do most of my couples work. I mean, love, but like, I want them to go, if it's just general communication, go see an EFT therapist, go like, you know, go see Gottman, go do all those things, you know, but when it comes to learning how to support each other through a loss, when it comes through how, like now sex, the idea of sex makes me want to vomit now. Like, how do we shift some that back, you know, and break those associations and help you have an ongoing relationship through all the stages and phases? Because that was a stage. And when you move forward, you want it to feel different, but that doesn't just automatically happen.
If people, not at all, if people want to connect with you, what is the best way to connect? If they would just, you know, felt connected to your story or pulled, like how can they reach out to you?
Yeah, no, I'd love to help people or help guide them in the right direction. So my company name is Supportive Solutions, and I'm located in Georgia. So my website is supportivesolutionsga.com. And there you can get all kinds of good contact information. If you're a professional, there's information about upcoming brain spotting trainings. I train people on how to do brain spotting. I do
Oh, awesome.
specialty trainings on perinatal mental health and trauma. I do consultation and consultation groups, and then individual and family therapy that happens, just because we need this more than ever. It was never easy to be a parent. COVID was another overlay on top of that. Economic stressors on top of that. Questions right now coming out of the Supreme Court on body autonomy and decision making is laying on that.
Yes.
And and then there's all the individual things that happen just to specific families.
Right.
Right. And so it's
a lot, and we need as many supports as we can get. So I'm so thankful for all the work you do. I'm so glad you were able to come to Friday. This is so much fun.
It was so good talking with you.
Yay. So I just have one last question that I love to ask all my guests. Is that what is one piece of advice that you would want the audience to walk away with today?
That trauma is treatable, that you cannot lose hope, because the story is not over till you decide it is. And so if you feel like this is all there is, and this is all there is to my life, connecting with somebody who can help gently guide you to the life you really want is possible. You can find healing. And that just because you feel some way today doesn't mean that that's how you will always feel.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. That's really inspirational. I think that message needs to be spread like on billboards. We'll make it happen. I have a vision. Do it. I'm a creative person. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for everyone who watches and supports. I'm always so appreciative, and being able to listen to the podcast. And I hope you all have a beautiful weekend. And I look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks with Friday Night Feels. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.